My name is Daniel, and this story recounts the terrifying events that happened to me. I'm sharing my story because I believe I need to know that what I experienced was real. Hopefully, by sharing it, I can find some solace. The story began in an old family mansion. The mansion had been in our family's possession for generations, and it always carried a sinister reputation in the town. There were countless legends circulating about demons and curses haunting the place, but being young and brave, I paid no heed to those tales. When I decided to visit the mansion, my family warned me, but I was determined to restore the house to its former glory and stay connected to our family's history. The night I arrived at the mansion, an eerie silence hung in the air. Everything seemed normal, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. The first night, falling asleep in my room was a challenge. I heard strange noises, distant laughter, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. When I checked my room, I found no one. On the second night, I woke from a restless sleep, my eyes half closed, to see a figure standing in the corner of my room. The figure beckoned, whispering, "Come, Daniel," before vanishing. Terrified, I awoke and searched my room, finding nothing. The boundaries between time and reality, dreams and wakefulness blurred inside the mansion. Each night, the figure visited me, its voice growing more distinct. Finally, one night, I decided to follow the figure. I walked through the mansion's dark corridors until it led me to a hidden room. The room was covered in strange symbols on the walls, with traces of burnt candles on the floor. The figure revealed itself, a fusion of a demon and a devil, with black wings and a menacing grin. "I am here, Daniel," it said. "I've been waiting for you." I recoiled in fear, but this time, I didn't want to escape. This figure was a manifestation of a curse that had haunted my family for centuries. My family had made a pact with demons and devils, and now I was to pay the price. I refused to succumb to the influence of the demon and devil. Instead, I resolved to break the curse on the mansion. It was a long and arduous process, but I succeeded in the end. The demons and spirits, along with the curse they represented, disappeared, leaving my family, who had been trapped under their influence, behind. The mansion was finally quiet and peaceful, but the memory of this experience remained with me. I now carry the story of a family cursed by demons and devils, and the price I paid to end that curse. I hope this story reminds you that curses can be real, and the importance of staying vigilant.
My name is Joseph, and I'd like to share a real incident that happened to me about a week ago. I began waking up spontaneously at 3 o'clock in the morning. You see, in movies, they often talk about 3 a.m. being the time when supernatural entities are most active. Initially, I didn't pay much attention, but I found myself compulsively checking the time each time I woke up. I didn't know any prayers, but I would recite what I knew and then pull the covers tightly over me before going back to sleep. I wouldn't hear any unusual sounds. Nothing strange would happen. My eyes would just suddenly open at that hour. For a couple of nights, I didn't wake up at that time, and I dismissed it as a mere coincidence. Then, 2 consecutive nights, I started waking up again, but this time, I began to walk. Our house is a single-story one with a garden, and my dad is fond of gardening. My family is very close-knit, and my dad and I share a special bond. During one of those late-night episodes, I found myself walking outside without being fully conscious. Our house has an outer door, and right before that, there's an inner door you have to open to get outside. That night, I first went to the inner door and opened it. Afterward, I headed to the outer door. What's strange is that I could clearly see what was happening outside behind the outer door. I could see my dad sitting at a table, sipping tea, and he called out to me, "Come, son, let's have tea together." The odd part was that there was a wall between me and the outer door, and the door itself was shut tight. It was impossible for me to see what was happening outside. It was as if there was an extra set of eyes that allowed me to see. As I reached out to open the outer door, I realized it was locked. Our door is always locked, but I was acting as if I didn't know, trying to unlock it. My mom heard me and, thinking there might be a burglar, called out, "Who's there?" That's when things got even stranger. Although my mom was about 10 meters away from me in the bedroom, I could see her clearly, which was impossible. It was as if there were eyes in that room showing me what was happening. When I finally gave up trying to open the door, my mom appeared behind me and asked what I was doing outside at that hour. That's when I suddenly regained my senses and asked, "When did I get here?" My mom mentioned that I had sleepwalked. I went back to bed. A day later, I asked my mom if my eyes were open when she found me outside. She replied, "I don't know. Your back was turned towards me." When I asked if I had my hands up in the air, she said no. I questioned how I was lying on the bed when she heard me, and she was puzzled, asking if I had come into the room. Even as I write this, I can feel a chill down my spine. When I shared this with others, they were convinced it wasn't just sleepwalking. I have a deep love for my dad, and something or someone seemed to have shown him to me outside, trying to lure me out. The fact that the door was locked was my saving grace. I am certain this wasn't sleepwalking. On a dark and misty autumn evening, I sat alone inside an old wooden cabin. The cabin was situated by the edge of a lake, and the still surface of the water reflected the darkness like a shimmering mirror. I could sense that winter was approaching, for the cold wind's chilling breath was creeping up my neck. I had spent the day wandering through the forest, taking in the tranquil beauty of a nature hike. However, now, as I sat in the cabin, an eerie feeling settled within me. The silence of the woods was unusual. The birds and other animals were oddly silent. Suddenly, I noticed the candle in the room flickering. I closed my eyes and whispered, "It's just the wind," to myself. But when I opened them again, a terrifying presence stood before me. It was a grotesque shadow, shrouded in black robes, with its face concealed. It remained motionless, except for its dark, piercing eyes that seemed to gaze directly into my soul. The silence of the shadow sent shivers down my spine. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice trembling. Yet, I received no response. The cabin began to grow colder, and a deep sense of fear washed over me. My eyes remained fixed on the shadow's eyes, and then I realized something was terribly wrong. The shadow was mimicking my movements. When I raised my hand, it did the same. When I stood up, it followed suit. "What do you want?" I shouted, but still, I received no answer. The shadow continued to mimic my every move. Suddenly, the shadow vanished, and the room returned to normal. But I was trembling, consumed by fear. Who was it, and why was it here? These questions swirled in my mind as I heard a twig snap from outside. I rushed to the window and peered out. In the depths of the forest, I saw a distant glimmer of light. The light was drawing nearer, and it didn't take long for me to understand. It was another shadow, but this time much larger and more menacing. As the shadow approached, I recoiled in fear and rushed back into the cabin, locking the door. I positioned myself by the window, watching as the shadow drew closer. It reached the front of the cabin and rattled the window, trying to frighten me. Its endless, dark eyes fixated on me. That's when I realized. The shadow wanted to become me. It wanted to exist alongside me as a second me. But this desire made it a dangerous entity. In terror, I stepped back, and the shadow suddenly shattered, dispersed, and disappeared. However, I knew this was only a momentary respite, for I understood that it could return at any time. Since that day, I never saw that horrifying shadow again. But every night, I checked the window. It could return at any moment, driven by its relentless desire to coexist with me. This dreadful encounter will haunt me for the rest of my life. On a dark and stormy night, shrouded in chilling suspense, I narrate this tale. Every word of it is true, and this story stems from the events that turned me into a ghost hunter. The incidents I am about to relate marked the beginning of a chain of events that changed my life forever. I have always had an inclination for the peculiar and the eerie. I take pleasure in investigating the mysterious and the frightening. So, when I heard the stories surrounding the abandoned Maplewood mansion, I eagerly awaited my chance to explore its secrets. Legend had it that years ago, A gruesome murder had occurred in the mansion, perpetrated by a savage killer. Witnesses to the incident claimed that the killer had appeared as nothing more than a shadow. Summoning my courage, I trespassed into the mansion one night. As I ventured deeper into the rooms, the atmosphere grew increasingly darker and more menacing. It was at this point that I felt a presence within the room. My gaze fixated on a corner where I saw a shadow, but it vanished instantly. I quickly turned, and for a moment, my eyes were drawn to the photographs on the walls. It was then that I understood. The old legend was true. The shadow materialized before me suddenly. Fear gripped me, and I stood frozen. I could see nothing of its face, only the cold rush of air and the stench of death that filled the room. The shadow silently approached, extending its hand towards my throat. I could not breathe, helpless as it clutched my windpipe, and I felt as if I were experiencing my final moments. In that moment, I realized that the entity before me was the killer, the very manifestation of the ancient murder that had occurred within the Maplewood mansion. My eyes grew dim, and I gasped for one last breath before losing consciousness. When I awoke, I found myself chained in the basement of the mansion. I hastily surveyed my surroundings and noticed that I was not alone. Other victims were present, each of us imprisoned, and the killer, just as he had in legend, appeared as a ghostly shadow. Throughout the night, the savage killer would emerge from the shadows, one by one selecting his victims. He materialized suddenly, took his prey, and vanished once more into the abyss. Eventually, it was my turn. In the pitch-black room, the killer transformed into a shadow. Once again, his grip closed around my throat, and I felt the chill of death. I uttered my final words, "I know who you are." But my vision darkened before anything else could be said. Now, I recount this story because I do not wish to remember the horrors I experienced within the Maplewood mansion. The killer came as a shadow, dragging me to my demise. That shadow still roams there, and perhaps one day it will return.